Training for something like an ultra marathon is a perfect storm for burnout. Even if it's something you love, that much hard, time consuming training often requires some sort of break. Sometimes it's a couple weeks, sometimes it's a season, taking a winter to go do skimo or whatever, and sometimes it's a shift to a whole new sport. We don't talk about it nearly enough. We often identify so much as runners that we forget we're allowed to take time to reset and just do other things in life. Heather Hart is a perfect example of this. She's the owner of Hart Strength Endurance, and she is the popular blog writer of Relentless Forward Commotion. And she's a powerhouse in the ultra running community, but she's also had her fair share of burnout over the years, most recently resulting in her taking quite a bit of time off to focus on biking and adventure racing. Heather and I got together to discuss burnout and how it's perfectly normal to shift passions throughout your life, healthy even. And if you've ever needed to take a break after a long training cycle or wondered how your participation in this sport might change over the years, I know you'll get a lot out of this interview. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will Franz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. Welcome back, or welcome to Trail and Ultra Running Training. This week we have Heather Hart. She's been on the podcast before when we talked about safety and running, and she and I reconnected recently at the first or whatever USCA Ultra Running Coaching Conference. So Heather, good to have you. For those who don't know who you are, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back. So my name is Heather Hart. I am an exercise physiologist, CSCS, and ultra running coach. I co-founded Hart Strength Endurance Coaching with my husband back in 2017. So we've got a team of about 8 coaches right now, work with a bunch of athletes, ultra runners, adventure racers, and some other fun endurance sports we dabble in there as well. And I also blog. I've been writing a blog at Relentless Forward Commotion since 2009. So yeah, old school blogger here. But that's fine. I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina is where I'm based right now. And yeah, I like to run.
That's awesome. I actually don't think I asked you this ever. How did you get into the whole blogging thing? Because that's early, like for the
right.
record.
Yeah,
I back then. So yeah,
I know that I'm like of the mommy blogger era. So I have 2 teenage boys. They're 17 and 15 now, but back in 2009 they were, toddlers and newborns, and I was at home by myself with them a lot of the day, and I needed to talk to an adult. But there were no adults to talk to, so I found writing. It actually started with, this is going to go way back, MySpace had a blog section on everyone's profile. So I started there. Everybody started kind of transitioning over to Blogspot. So I did that as well. And it just kind of took off. I never expected it to. And I would say, the first few years I was just writing about myself, about momming and running and how those things went hand in hand. But more and more people were coming to me, because at that time I was in school getting my degree in exercise science. People were coming to me with questions, training questions, racing questions. So I started writing about that. And it just naturally progressed over the years to what the site is now. I still call it a blog, but it's really an informational site with articles about running, training, strength training, all of that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, if anybody's been in a Facebook community for too long, they'll eventually see one of your training plans up there somewhere. So
yeah, it still blows my mind. Like I'll be out and about and people are like, I read your blog, or I know all about you. I'm like, you do? It's cool though.
I can imagine. It's super weird. Like I get a very small amount of that, and it's still surreal. So I'm sure it happens to you all the time, and it's really weird.
Yeah. You get creeped out for a second, and then you're like, oh wait, I put that information out there. That's right. Of course.
Yes, like I asked for this life. It's a weird thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I have been, and I've mentioned it a couple times on here, that I have been following what you have noted as a midlife biking crisis, basically. Yeah. Biking midlife crisis. And I've really enjoyed it, because as someone who's I get burnout quite a bit. And
Mhm.
I really appreciated your post multiple months ago at this point, where it's like, we do this, I need to take a step back from coaching and all these things. And since then, you've just been posting about biking, which I have really enjoyed. Because I think honestly, it took a lot of guts to step away from, as a running coach in charge of a running company, to step away from posting about running content. I can imagine would have been hard. So like, what
Yeah.
allowed you to, or what made you like finally take the step? Because I feel like it probably was brewing longer than we all first saw
Yeah, yeah, it was brewing for a very long time.
it.
So I kind of dove headfirst into the world of running in I want to say 2006, after I really discovered a love for running. And
Mm,
and it's probably a bit of my ADHD, and then also just genetics, my personality. When I find something I love, I am 110% in. Like, I just go all out. It becomes
same.
everything. And so very quickly running became everything. It was my hobby. It was, my career. All of my friends, my entire social circle was running. Everything, what I would consume on social media, running. There's just nothing in my life that wasn't around running. And I lived that way for years. And I
Mm-hmm.
can't really tell you exactly what the tipping point was, but probably, around 2 years ago, I really just started to have a bit of frustration, realizing there's more to me than running. I'm there's all these other things I want to talk about, and I want to do, and I want to be. And when I would try to talk about them, it was like, echo, like nobody wants to listen. Nobody's there, because I had put myself into this very specific hole where, I made my own bed, as they would say. I
Mm-hmm.
surrounded myself with nothing but running. And so when I didn't want to talk about running, there was no one there. So,
I get that.
yeah, it got a little frustrating. And then, I had some medical issues going on at the time, where I had to pull back from running myself. And I found myself really frustrated in that, even like with my clients that I was working with, all I could see was how, headstrong and focused on running they were as well, which we want that from our clients, but not to these obsessive levels. And it really just made me realize I don't want to be this person. I want to
Mm-hmm.
discover more about me. And in order to do that, I had to take a step back from coaching. It's not the client's fault. It was purely just for me. And fortunately, we were at a place with our business, and with my blog, that I could do that. I could take that step back, focus on some other things, and still help the business run without actively coaching. So I just started, riding my bike a lot, fell in love with it. And that's where
I
I
love
am now.
that.
That, when that happened, I think I had one bicycle, and now I'm up to three. So,
As that happens,
oh
yes, I
well.
understand. Yeah. Oh man, I think that's great. And you just finished a race, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. We just
Yeah.
so adventure racing is kind of my passion right now.
Mm,
Which involves tons of different disciplines, which is, again, it's really great because, you, especially with training, you get to do all these different things, and you don't have time to
yeah.
get bored with just one sport, because there's so many to train for. So we did a 26.2 hour, which I love that play on the time. It was 26.2 hour adventure race in the Pisgah National Forest area in North Carolina. So we started at noon on Saturday, and then went through overnight to about, it was 2:12 p.m. the next day, which ended up being actually 27 hours because of the time change. But yeah, that was an ass kicker. We live again, Myrtle Beach. It's very flat here, and those mountains, I know people kind of underestimate the East Coast, but East Coast mountains can be gnarly, and
Yes, I
we did a lot
can.
of climbing.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's always weird to me when I see it out here. Like when I see a race back there that has about as much elevation as the ones out here, and it's like, oh, that must be hell. That must be a rough time.
We don't
Yeah.
have those buffed out trails with like the nice switchbacks. It's just like, here's a bunch of rocks, go up
Yeah.
it.
It's also usually someone like really went out of like Laz went out of their way to like figure out how to fucking put that much elevation into a route. So it's like
Yeah,
it's very like strategically planned to make it suffering. Whereas here it's just like, I accidentally got 4,000 feet because I climbed a mountain. There it's
exactly.
like, no, somebody tried to make this as hard as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the nature of adventure racing is that there's usually not a set course. You're given a map or multiple maps and coordinates that you have to navigate to. But this race, the race director was like, okay, well, you're going to start and you're going to go to the top of Table Rock Mountain, and there's no other way. Like essentially the race starts, but it doesn't actually start till you get there. So it was just like uh it was like a 4 hour just slog riding bikes up this dirt road, just big chunky rocks. And it was definitely one of those type 2 funds where you question your choices.
That's amazing. So I know this isn't really the point of today, but like what does adventure racing entail? Like
Yeah.
how
I
yeah.
love to talk about it.
Yeah,
So
please.
yeah, adventure racing is a multidisciplinary sport. Um, So your typical disciplines are going to be foot travel, whether it's running, hiking, trekking, whatever, usually mountain biking, and usually some sort of paddle. But unlike a triathlon or a duathlon or something like that, where there's a set course, adventure racing, you're given a map and coordinates, and you have a compass, and you have to navigate to get from point to point. Sometimes you have to navigate to those points in order. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's like you figure out where you want to go to try to get as many of these points as you can. And you'll have to use these various disciplines along the way. So for example, in this race we just did, I want to say we spent like a good 4.5 hours on a bike, dropped our bikes. We had to navigate on foot, climbing up Table Rock Mountain. We rappelled with ropes down a cliff, back on foot to find some more, ride our bikes back to where we started kind of. Then it was like another few hours of trekking overnight, back on the bikes again, then in the kayak. So it's really fun. It's kind of like a scavenger hunt, but you are just looking for flags in the woods, big orange and white flags. So it's a really cool sport for people who love, doing what we do, the endurance, long, slow sport. But you don't get to mentally check out. You can't just like put your head down and run for 100 miles. You have to think. You have to use strategy. You have to like work with a team. It's almost always a team sport. So it just kind of adds a whole new dynamic to it. And when you're getting older like me, in your 40s, and you just kind of want to keep your brain fresh. It's a lot of fun.
Honestly sounds really cool and like very much up my alley of things that I enjoy. So I don't know, not to take too much time on this, but like do you like if you're working in a team, do you all like have to get to all of the points at the same time?
Yes, that's the
Okay,
tricky part. So you cannot
cool.
split up. You're not supposed to
Cool.
split up. You have to all stay. The race director will tell you usually in the rules beforehand, but it's usually like 50 meters apart. So, if you're on a 4-person team, which is a traditional team size, and somebody's struggling, you're all struggling. You're only as
Yeah.
strong as the weakest link. But the cool thing is that usually everyone kind of has their strengths. Like someone will be the main navigator who's going to figure out where you're going. Somebody's going to be that person who can hold some extra weight or pull some extra weight to keep the team moving faster. Someone's going to be the team captain, making the decisions, making sure everybody's eating on time and like staying hydrated. So yeah, it's a ton of fun. But it coming from ultra marathon, which is arguably a very like solo, I don't want to call it a selfish sport, but it's very solo.
Yeah.
Everything you do it's about you. It's hard to kind of make that transition because now not only do you have to kind of deal with somebody else if they're having a bad day, but if you're the one having the bad day, you need to be able to put away your pride, accept help from others, not turn into a total bitch because you haven't eaten enough,
Oh,
especially when
as
you're
we all
racing with
can.
your
Yeah.
spouse. Yeah, like
Yeah.
I race with my husband, so that's fun sometimes.
Oh man, that feels like that could be either the complete solving or complete destruction of any marriage.
Yeah, right.
Oh
I just
man.
closed my screen a little here. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure this out.
No, you're all
Oh,
good.
technology. Oh, it gets me every time. There we go. Okay, good.
Me too. You should watch me like take 30 seconds to figure out where the fucking record button is, even though I do this weekly. Um, yeah, and it's just like that sounds super fun and a thing I'd really like very interested in getting into. I'll have to
You
ask you
should give
questions
it a
about this at some
try.
point. Yeah,
Yeah, I know this isn't what we're here to talk about, but I'm going to give a quick plug. Go to
please.
USARA, USA Adventure Racing, and they're going to have, a calendar of races all across the country. I think a lot of people would be surprised to realize that, this, we think ultra running is underground. This is like even more grassroots underground. And it's probably like in people's backyards and they just don't even realize it. So if you're interested, USARA.com, you can find a bunch of information, beginner friendly races and stuff like that.
Yeah, I just made a note. I'll put it in the show notes for sure. And like
Cool.
all the links and stuff. Sweet. Thank you. That's really interesting. So I guess like to pull out of that, and we'll talk about that more at some other time.
Yeah.
What led to this like burnout that pushed you into this adventure racing and mountain biking break?
Yeah. So I'll be completely transparent and open here and talk about, I think, an elephant in the proverbial room of ultra running. I know that I personally had put so much of my identity into running. And I also was using running as maybe a means of therapy rather than actually going to therapy. And so, I just, as I'm an educated professional in the field, I know what our bodies, can tolerate and like what is proper training and how we should go about having, goal races and off seasons and things like that. I know all of this, but for myself as an individual, I was not following those appropriate training methods. And so I spent years just literally running away from my problems. That sounds so cliche, but I bet so many people listening are like, yeah, I get it. I probably am too. And we almost
do.
Yeah, we tend to almost celebrate that in the ultra running world. We are like the kings and queens of self-deprecating jokes. You just go on Instagram and see all these hilarious accounts. I follow all of them, like, ultra running memes and all those guys. They're hilarious. But again, I think that elephant in the room is that a lot of us have things that we need to deal with, and we try to deal with it by running. But our bodies can only handle so much before we start to break down physically and mentally. And I certainly know that was the case for me. I got to a point where I was constantly like battling something, whether it was like I just physically felt burnt out, my hormones were starting to go crazy because I wasn't recovering enough, or just physical issues. It was always something. And it finally got to the point where I was like, I can't keep doing this. I want to be able to run and do these great activities for the rest of my life. I want to be that badass old lady on trail, passing the kids and looking like it's effortless. But I won't be able to be that person if I don't take a step back and take care of myself now. So it was very much a come to Jesus moment with myself, where I had to be like, you got to do something. And again, I'll be the first to admit that one of those big things was going to therapy, finding out, all these things that I was like trying to ignore and run from. And that when I dealt with those things, I no longer felt that insane desire to just run all the time to make myself feel less anxious, less depressed, and feel better. So that was certainly a catalyst into all of this as well.
Yeah. And I double plug for therapy. I've like dabbled a little bit, and I'm just talking to my best friend. He is a professional LMHC, and it's just like, give it a try. There's a bunch of ways you can give it a shot. I'll give my own little plug here for biggerthanthetrail.org. I would love to like actually somehow affiliate with them deeper, but they are fantastic and get three free months of therapy, and most of us need it. So,
I didn't know they do that. That's awesome. That's so wonderful.
They do like 3 free months to BetterHelp or whatever. And that's usually a social worker, not a therapist, just like put the distinction out there. But like, it's still like a good way to dip your toe into the realm of maybe dealing with your problems. So absolutely good deal.
That's so great. That's so great. And I think, so many people are afraid of it. I know I was, 39 years old
Absolutely.
before I finally went to therapy, even though I've known, I was the first person to tell other people to go. I've never thought it was a bad thing, but it took me 39 years to actually go. And so I think a lot of people think it has to be all or nothing, which again, that's our personality as ultra runners, right? I think that you'll find that both can exist. You can use running as a means of mental health therapy, but you can also talk to somebody and have that benefit you as well. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
And they can swing in and out. Like I'm not currently seeing anybody, but I'm sure I will at some point again. And yeah, it took a long time for me to dip into it, even though like my dad had depression my whole life. Like I'm very steeped in the mental health stuff and they've been very open about it. Like wasn't a therapy person. So, it's a tough thing to really kind of feel comfortable doing, but it's a really good thing. I feel like kind of jump off that. We often in society kind of laud habits that aren't necessarily healthy, and I think that's kind of what we're leading to here. But it's like, my work ethic is high, and that's not always great, right? Like it's a lot of stuff that like we'll get praise for, but in many ways that it is me managing mental health and not necessarily the best way. And I think that's often where we get in ultra running for some people, where it's a good thing that you exercise and are fit and do a ton of cardio and these things. But it's also like if you're running a 100-mile race like every 2 weeks, then maybe I'm not here to judge anybody else. So it's possible you're fine, but it's maybe you're not. And I think that's often a thing that we like hold on a pedestal when often it might be a signal that something isn't quite rolling correctly for you. Does that fit for you?
And it's funny when I first went to therapy, one of the very first things she asked me was, do I participate in any sort of like self-harm? And I was like, no, I don't. And she's like, do you, she just started rambling things off, like the obvious things, like, do you physically harm yourself? So many different things. Do you steal? Are you sexually promiscuous? She just went on and on. I was like, no, none of these things. And then I'm like, wait a minute. I run a lot. And she kind of looked at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, I run a lot. And that really, in a way, was kind of, a form of self-harm. Like I'm not taking care of myself. I'm doing things that are destructive. And, to kind of take a step back, when we were at the ultra running conference, this was mentioned multiple times. Somebody, one of the speakers would be talking about something and would take a step back and say, we have to remember that what we do is not normal. The amount that we all run. To us, our community, we think like, oh, it's totally fine because this is just what we do. We're ultra runners. We run ridiculous amounts of mileage every week and everybody else does it. So it's fine. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not normal. And so it's not necessarily always healthy. So I think that, when we're doing all of these, if you're one of those people who's running all the time, just incessantly doing all these races and your body's starting to break down and stuff, take a step back and think, why am I doing this? What am I doing this for? No, it's not drinking or drugs, but is it healthier? Everyone has to answer that question for themselves, but I think the answer sometimes is no, it's just another form of self-destructive behavior.
I agree. I think it's absolutely like sometimes the answer is yes and sometimes it's no. And it really depends on where you are and what you're using it for. We end up with the same thing with alcohol, right? Like you can absolutely be the person who like drinks a drink or a couple a week. And I'm not saying alcohol's ever actually healthy for you. We've shown this, but it can be like socially good and it's just a thing. And like if you have a glass of wine, it doesn't really do that much harm to you and it's a good deal. If that's like the Italians drink like every day, good for them. However, there's also the people who like Chuck Bukowski who literally couldn't get through a day without drinking 2/5 of Jack. And there's probably a middle ground there that a lot of us are on that spectrum one way or the other. And it's how whether we can live with it or not is really the question. I think any form of addiction, the actual question is like whether you're able to step away from it and whether it's harming other stuff in your life. And if we can't step away from it and if it's negatively affecting other things in your life, we should probably give it a look.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if we're like, when it comes to running, you'd mentioned that like you had some medical issues that force you to pull back from running. And I don't like dive into what you want. It's your medical history, but like how did that give you a wake up call or a break or anything that might needed to have like force you to reflect on some stuff?
Yeah. So I'm an open book. I will talk about this stuff all day. So what happened to me was I actually started developing a what's called a pelvic organ prolapse, where like my bladder was trying to come through my pelvic floor, and it was due to pelvic floor weakness. And so I had to, like, the first obvious thing was, well, you have to stop running until we figure out how to fix this, because it was just getting worse and it was wildly uncomfortable while running. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that this was actually being exacerbated for two reasons. One, my hormone levels were just off the charts because I wasn't taking care of myself. And just that stress of not training the way I should and not recovering the way I should. But then two, that was actually from a weakness that I had in my glute, I think it was glute medius, due to all these long, slow miles that I just my body kind of overcompensated over time. That was contributing to it as well. And so, I immediately had to stop running. But then when I really stepped back and thought about it, I was like, wow, not taking care of myself and doing all of this is only making things significantly worse. So we not only need to heal the immediate problem, but I need to go way back and figure out how can we make sure this never happens again. And for me, that was taking a big step back from running.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm smiling because like you just immediately made so much more sense to me, because you're such a proponent of strength training, and like I can very much see why. Like that makes so much sense to me.
Yeah. Well, and the crazy thing is, I've been a proponent of strength training for so long. And so when I finally got to the right PT, pelvic floor physical therapist, they do exist, everybody. If I highly recommend seeing one if you're a female and you're struggling with any sort of issues that you think may be related. I got really lucky in that my pelvic floor PT was a runner. So she immediately was like, well, we're going to figure this out. And I'm not going to tell you to stop running, but let's figure it out. And when she told me I had weak glutes, I was like, excuse me? Like I'm in the gym 5 days a week. I run, I squat heavy, I run hard. Like, what are you talking about? I have weak glutes. And sure enough, though, she did these various tests, and I had this weakness. And so yeah, that even more, I'm even a bigger proponent now, because what we think maybe our strengths, they might not be after all. So just keeping your body healthy and well-rounded is so important in so many ways.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like there's so much there, but the ability to guide your own strength training for your deficiencies is like super important. And I know you and I chat about this for hours at the conference, so don't need to harp on that too much, but also like it gives you a place to be when you need to like take a pause from running or something, right? Like these off seasons that we talk about, they are important. They happen in every other sport. Like you don't see a American football player playing for 52 weeks out of the year. It's a 16-week season, and then they have a postseason, and then they have like an off and a preseason, right? And like yet in ultra running, for some reason, it's normal to run 50 weeks out of the year. And I've always found it odd. Don't know.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I kind of, it brings it back to putting too much of your identity in running. I know that there's a lot of people, I've felt this myself. Years ago I had to have hernia surgery, and when the doctor told me 2 months without running, I was like completely lost, and so I've been there, but I've also had clients, and I've seen strangers on the internet post that I can't run, I don't know what to do with myself, I don't know who I am anymore. And I think that's part of the reason why some people choose to run year round, because they literally just, they don't know how to have an off season. And some people just enjoy it, and that's okay too. But either way, I encourage people to think, like, if you really want to keep running for the rest of your life, you need to take care of your body in a way that promotes being able to run for the rest of your life. And that includes having downtime and off seasons. We cannot be, going for goal race after goal race after goal race without breaks. None of our bodies are invincible, and eventually it's going to catch up with you.
I mean, as someone who used to put all of your identity in running, like I realized you're kind of forced to shift, but like what allowed you to make that mental mental change?
So this, I think the timing, I'm going to say thank you to the universe for this, but my boys becoming teenagers went from like, kids to all of a sudden they had their own sports goals, their own like full-time schedules that I had to chauffeur them around for. And I also, I'm gonna get really sappy here. I had that realization of like, oh crap, like I only have a couple more years left with them and they're adults and they're gone. Like, where did that come from? That happened so fast. And for me, having that realization just, it instantly made everything else seem so much less important. And so that was just such good timing for me personally, in that I was able to be like, you know what? I've got the rest of my life to run and focus on these races and do all of this stuff. But right now I'm going to take a step back and, be with my family, take care of my body, and do these other things that I want to do in this phase of life. I know that certainly isn't a good example that everybody can follow. You might not have two teenagers kicking around at home that that you need to get all mom emotional about. But yeah, that was a huge catalyst for me in taking that step back.
Love that. But also, like, I feel like there's some exercise that can make you a better human, like it allows you to process the world and deal with things and all sorts of stuff, right? So how do you find that balance between finding the amount of activity that helps you be more like be a better mom, right? Because there is a level there versus the amount that's like taking you away. Like, what has that been for you? And I realize it'll be different for everybody, but
yeah,
how's that work for you?
It's certainly, I think it's definitely a journey for everyone to really, really be honest with themselves about how they're handling their time management, whether it's with your responsibilities, like as far as work, as far as family life, as far as relationships go, like how are you managing your time there? How are you feeling physically? Again, we are all a bunch of stubborn runners and we will push through anything. That's what we do. But when you're really honest with yourself, like, how are you feeling? Are you tired all the time? How's your appetite? Are things not healing? Are you not progressing as well as you think you should? These are all teeny tiny little signs from our bodies telling us that, maybe we're doing too much. Disrupted sleep. And these are things I tell my clients all the time to look out for. Are you snapping at your spouse a little more than you used to? Are you feeling a little more frustrated? Are you feeling a little more teary than you should? Tiny little things like this are all signs. And so it's taken me, I've been running as long as I can remember now, my whole adult life. And it's probably taken me 20 years to get to the point where I am so much more in tune with my body now. And I can kind of tell, like, okay, I probably did a little too much last week. We're going to pull it back this week. Or I'm tired, but that's purposeful, right? Like I'm in a phase of training where this is purposeful overreaching. This is what I'm supposed to be feeling like, but next week's a cutback week and I'll be okay then. But yeah, I think kind of setting aside that I'm an ultra runner and I'm super tough. And I feel like I always make fun of David Goggins, and I don't want to be that, I don't want to make fun of anybody. So I won't, but I'm going to say that whole, like, got to carry the boats or whatever it is they always say.
Absolutely.
You can set that mindset aside. We're not, there's no need to be that way if it's negatively affecting the rest of your life. So really be in tune with your body and realize that if you're going to be a strong runner for your lifetime, you got to take care of your body now.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like sometimes we get caught in what hard actually means, to just use Goggins' word. Like, I think I'm not a huge fan either. He actually seems fine. It's the cult around him that bothers me. But that's a whole thing. Anyway, so like the hard thing, like, and I will use myself as the example to this to no end. Like, for years, I was able to like run, no sleep, work myself to death, and like lift really heavy things. But mobility work, like 5 minutes of effort to like get my hips open, like, it was time for that, right? But no, it's like, it's just because I actually found that to be harder. It's just like, I'm not willing to do with a hard thing for what I find hard, right? Like, I feel like we're all kind of avoiding this thing, something, be it therapy or stretching or whatever. And if we can actually like process what we actually find difficult, we just end up a little more well-rounded.
Right. I had one of my favorite things I've ever heard was from a strength and conditioning professor I had. And he said something along the lines of like, true discipline in athletics is having the ability to not do something.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I was like, what? And I had to think about it. I was like, okay, that makes so much sense. Like, if you're truly a disciplined athlete, you need to be able to say, I'm not going to do that because it's going to negatively affect, my outcome. And that feels so taboo in our world because it's like the harder, just do it, suck it up, get it done, beast mode or whatever. But, sometimes being a really good hard ass athlete is not doing things.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
like such a good message that I feel like we need to push more. And we end up in this space where it's like you're constantly going for the next big goal, the next big goal. And even if it's like, and yet we end up asking this question sometimes. I'm sure you've had this conversation where it's like, there's this athlete that keeps like 50K, 50 miler, 100 miler, 200 miler. And they're like, why am I slow? It's because you keep fucking adding distance and you haven't focused on an actual speed session in 20 years, right? So like, why are you slow? It's because you haven't done speed work in the past 2 years that'll actually make you faster. And it's these things where like we want to have all of it, and you can't have all of it. And that's just
Exactly.
a difficult pill sometimes.
Yeah, we have all of this research and science, showing us how bodies progress in athletics and how we get faster and how we get stronger and how we go further. We know all of this, of course, in the ultra running world, that science is still evolving at these distances, but the basics of it, we know how this works. Yet so many of us, myself included, I've been there, want to believe that we're the outlier, that we're the one who can defy all of that, evidence, and that we can just keep going and things are going to get better, or things are going to get faster. And it just doesn't work that way. Sometimes it'll work for a little bit, but in the big picture, the long run, if you will, it doesn't work that way.
So I realize like you found this for yourself. Like, how do you convey this to other people? Right. Because like I've been forced this wake up call a couple of times. And I mean, fortunately, I'm 34. Like I kind of got my ass, I kicked my own ass enough in my 20s that I'm injured enough now that I've like been forced to take time off. Right. So it's like, it's a give and take. I would not necessarily wish to have torn hip labrums and separated shoulders and whatever, but it's like, it has been a forced come to Jesus meeting. But for the athlete who hasn't had that, like, how do you convey that? Like, maybe get them to reflect.
It's going to depend on the athlete. And as you know, with coaching, one of the unique arts of coaching is really being able to approach each individual in a way that they're going to hear you, that they're going to listen. So, sometimes I have to be the hard ass mom and be like, listen, I've been there. I've done that. I've seen other people do this. It's not going to work for you. Like, why did you hire me? I'm the professional here. Please listen, please. But other times it's just meeting someone, gently and giving them a little grace and understanding that they have to learn that lesson themselves, but guiding them in a way that hopefully will make them realize. Over the years I have, I've been coaching runners specifically for about 7 years now. And I have had a handful of athletes where I've just straight up said, listen, we're not doing this. And if you're going to keep doing it, we're not going to work together. And we've had to go our separate ways. Yeah, it's really hard to do because you want to help everyone, but some people just don't want to be helped. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to, listen. And so that's all you can do is hope they'll listen, but they won't.
More
but yeah,
I've had to say, like, I will not be a part of you hurting yourself.
Exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. For me, like just being an open book and sharing my story and talking about the, the good and the bad and the taboo type things people don't want to talk about, like therapy and, like my pelvic floor falling apart. I find that actually helps because when people hear these stories, they go, oh, maybe I'm not the one person out there who's super weak. And so I have to keep pushing. Like maybe this is normal and I'm just a normal person and other people have gone through these things too. And so maybe I'll give myself a little grace and pull back. So sharing, experiences is very, very helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say it's not like I'm completely on the other side of it. Like right now, I'm dealing with some like metatarsalgia because, like, you and I've chatted about this. But it's like I had to take 8 or 9 months off of running because I couldn't deal with the asthma thing and doctors and blah blah blah. And then I solved that and I'm like, cool, let's go. And I
Yep.
immediately was so excited because I just really enjoyed it. I happened to get back to it in the fall, so like wasn't even a heat thing. So it's like let's just go running, and then now my foot's hurt. So
Yeah.
it's
And
not ruined. I'm out for like a week and a half, but I'm just like it's a cycle. I don't know.
I think the nature of what makes us like these endurance athletes who can go these extreme distances, um I think there's a innate part of us that just we're never going to be perfect no matter how much we know. Like we have that desire to keep doing. So yeah, that I when you say you're not quite on the other side, I don't think any of us ever will be. And that's
Yeah,
part of
that's
what
fair.
makes us us. But each day if we can just be a little more proactive and look out for ourselves, hopefully it'll work out in the end.
And I mean, you've been doing this longer than me, but I feel like there's a weird message that we kind of thread the needle on in sports in general, but especially this one, where I hear so many coaches kind of deliver the message of like, you will get injured running, right? And I don't think that's necessarily inaccurate, if I'm being honest, but I also would like to thread and the needle a little finer where it's like you will get a niggle and some tweaks running. I would love it to not blow into a full blown like season ending injury, right? And I think that's the thing that we often like almost joke about to a degree, that it sets this like mind play like this place in people's minds where it's like, I'm just hurt, it's just part of my sport, where it's like, well, maybe take a fucking week off and
Yeah.
then your Achilles won't blow up to a degree that you have to take the next year off, right?
Mhm.
And that's an important thing to be able to thread.
Yeah, it's the way we approach that message is so important. I have worked with dozens of clients who were pretty new to running, or at least new to longer distance running, who within the first few weeks would say something to me kind of casually like, oh, everything hurts really bad, but that's running, that's how it's supposed to be. And I'm like, no, like this isn't
Sorry.
supposed to hurt.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable, yes. Hurt, no. There's something wrong. And I'm with you. There may be some crazy injuries, but that if one of my athletes gets seriously injured, it's because they tripped and fell down a small cliff and broke their leg on
Yeah.
a rock down, right? Those are the
Yeah.
kind of injuries that suck. But sports don't come without those kinds of risks. I would rather any day see a client show up to the start line of their goal race slightly undertrained than injured because they
Yes.
overtrain. Um, every day of the week. That is a hill I will die on. And I think that yeah, it's important for people to kind of realize that no, it's not supposed to hurt. And also that if you're constantly hurting yourself, like what's the rush? Why are you pushing so hard to reach this goal at the risk of your body when in theory you've got all this time? Like what is the rush to go from 0 to 100 miles in your first year of running? I don't think it's necessary. So I'm with you in that I don't
Agree.
think coaches should be saying, well, getting hurt is just part of it, because it's absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I do think like a mild niggle is probably an inevitability, and part of that I think is just the sport, right? Like I've made this analogy before, but it's like if your throw sucks in baseball, the ball doesn't go where it's supposed to go. With running, it's like sometimes the first signal that you're not using your glutes well is that you're overusing your calves, so we end up with like a mild like tweak in your Achilles. But it's like then there's the 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 reaction to that is either, hey, maybe let's take a second, like reassess and like dial back, or oh, it's 6 weeks down the line and now your Achilles, you actually have tendinopathy. Like, let's react to that a little differently.
Exactly. And when we're using our bodies in ways that we haven't before, there's going to be some discomfort. I mean, like for example, I've just come off of a couple of races. So I haven't put in a heavy leg day in a long time, probably like a month and a half. And so I did some deadlifts the other day, and today my hamstrings are screaming at me.
Yep.
So that's it, but that's not an injury. That's just, I'm uncomfortable because I've been using my body in a way it wasn't used to recently. And the same with running. If you go out and do, your first 20 miler ever, you're probably going to be a little sore. Hopefully you built up to it, but still those extra miles on top of whatever your last long run was, they're going to be uncomfortable. You're probably going to be a little sore. But yeah, if you're having a very specific injury and you're trying to run through it, it's like you said, they don't just go away.
No, absolutely not. You're speaking my language right now. I just started lifting heavy again last week and my ass is sore, like very
Yep.
sore.
Oh yeah.
But,
It's always the lower body. You're like, ow.
well, I was joking with a client yesterday. They're like, does it get easier? I'm like, not really if you want to keep getting stronger. Like the same weight gets easier. I can pick up 20 pounds now, like it's a paper clip, but like if I'm gonna get stronger on my deadlifts, it still sucks. Like it's what
Yep.
it is.
Yeah, I don't remember my husband. If he could hear me, he's in the other room. He'd probably start shouting the answer. But I know there was a cyclist who said something like that about like it doesn't get any easier. You just get faster or something like that.
Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
true. It's so true.
Yeah. So another thing that I think we often overlook is that like all stress is some kind of stress, right?
Mhm.
So like you see in the realm of ultra, the realm of like high level sports, it's often very like highly driven people. So they have this like hectic job where they work 60 hours a week and then they have a family and then they do this and then they also want to run a 100 miler. Like I feel like all of this leads to burnout in like every possible realm at once. Like do you see that a ton, and like how do
All the
you find
time.
a way to balance that?
Yeah, all the time. This is another like hard conversation I have to have with people. But okay, let me step back here. Runners tend to compartmentalize everything. So they see running
Yeah,
and then the rest of their life. And they don't think about how the rest of their life contributes to the running. They just think, I did my workouts, I should be getting faster, or I didn't do my workouts, I'm not going to get faster, or whatever their goal may be. And so often I'll have people who'll be like, oh yeah, I nailed my workouts, but I only sleep 4 hours a night, and that's just who I am. Or, I ate perfect, I fueled perfectly during my runs. I always do. But the rest of the day, I forget to eat lunch or I skip dinner because I was too busy. Or like they won't, like you said, they'll have a super busy job or kids or whatever. And because of that, they have to miss a run and they think to themselves like everything's ruined. And they don't consider, well, maybe all that stress, is enough. And you don't need that stress of that run on top of it. So yeah, anyway, the hard conversation that I do have to have occasionally with clients is to say, maybe this isn't the right time for you to be training for this specific goal. And I hate saying that because I want to be everyone's number one cheerleader. And I want to be that person who's like, you can do anything you set your mind to. We all can, right? But a very wise person who is my older sister once said to me when I was going through similar things when my kids were babies and I wanted to do all the things. I wanted to do like the Boston Marathon and an Ironman and this and that and everything. And she was like, Heather, running isn't going anywhere. Racing isn't going anywhere. Like this will be here for you when the time is right, but the time isn't right for you right now. Like there are other things. And so that are more important. And so I sometimes have to have that conversation with clients and say, I'm stoked you want to train for your first 100 miler. I think you can do it one day, but the fact that you can only dedicate 3 days to training, and even one of those days you're not sure if you'll be able to get a babysitter, or you don't know that it's going to work out, like maybe that's not conducive to a 100 miler right now. So let's find a goal that does fit into your life. That people don't realize. I know I've gone in a circle here, but to bring it back around,
yeah,
people do not realize how much the rest of your life really can affect the outcome of your training, but more importantly, the outcome of your recovery, because we make our adaptations to our training during periods of recovery. And if you're not sleeping well, if you're adding extra stress, if you're not eating well because of everything else going on in your life, you're not going to make those training adaptations, and it's just going to add more stress to your body.
yeah. And I couldn't hear you more when someone's like, do you think I can do this thing? I'm like, fuck yeah, you can do this thing, right? Like, but also like,
But
maybe
maybe
not
not right
now.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really hard thing to have that conversation because I really do want to. I mean, I like helping people do the hard things, right? Like that's kind of why I became a coach. But it is a really tough conversation sometimes. And you're like, well, Yeah, you have 3 days a week, and I promise you, you need more than 3 days a week to dedicate to running your first 100. You just do. Like it, that's just math. It's
Right.
like
And
the
it's
mileage doesn't fit, man.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not even, sometimes I'll have clients who they can make it happen. They can figure
Sure.
out a way to make the time happen, but now they're miserable. They're not
Hmm.
enjoying the process. And
Yeah.
they get to those last few weeks of training and they're just like, I can't wait for this to be over. And I tell all of our prospective clients that come to us that, my number one goal, besides not having you injured at the starting line, is that you get to the start line and you're like, wow, I really enjoyed this process. Maybe
Hmm.
not every workout, I'm not going to lie. Not every workout's going to be fun. We all have days where we're like, that sucked and I just don't want to do this. But in the big picture, I'm happy if you're happy. And if you're like, I just want this to be done and over with, then I haven't done my job in the capacity that I want to. So that said, yeah, you
I
can
agree.
make the time, but if it's going to make you miserable, why are we doing it? We're not paying our bills with our race results. At least none of my clients are elites that are
Yep.
paying bills with race results. So like, why are you going to do that to yourself?
Yeah. I mean, and that's a very important thing to thread that needle on. I think so many people that get famous either as influencers or professional athletes, like we see some level of their training schedule and kind of think that's what it takes. And they get paid to do that. Right. So that's a very important thing to recognize. Like that is their job. Um,
Exactly. And I'm
yeah.
glad you called out influencers in that too, because we tend to, I think most people can understand the elites. Like, okay, yes, that's their job. They're getting paid. But I think a
Mhm.
lot of people follow these influencers and even these micro influencers, and they don't realize that, they're getting paid to post these things. And therefore that they have more time to train because they're making money off of this, right? So we
Mhm.
look at them like they're us. They're everyday average people just like the rest of us. But their circumstances are not the same as everybody else's. It's just like me. I fully recognize that I have way more time to train
Mhm.
than most of my clients because I make my own schedule. I work from home. In to compare somebody who is a nurse working 12-hour shifts, how it would be awful for them to compare their training to my training because we're just not the same person.
Absolutely. I mean, same on my end. I don't actually have a ton of time on the way to train, but like I do work in the gym. It is very easy for me to slam out a set of deadlifts in between clients or whatever, right? Like hop on the treadmill for 20 minutes and get some of my miles in that way. Whereas like when I was working night shift driving snowcats at a ski resort, like that was not that. That's a very different realm, right? Like, yeah. So when I talk to my nighttime nursing client, like he and I have a very different conversation about our schedules. It's not the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then on that note too, like you and I both, I'm not sponsored by anybody, and I don't actually know if you are or not, but I do like make my living through coaching. And if I don't post about running, then I don't get to coach people, which I really like to coach people. So that's a thing for me to incentivize that I get to be on social media, whether I like it or not, which I've come to actually develop a mixed relationship with it. For years, I was just off of it. Now I'm just like, yeah, it allows me to help more people. It's great. But it's like, I do have to do that. It is my job. Whereas, like, for a lot of people, it's this weird interplay. And I don't think I necessarily, um, most of the people that are in kind of our space, I think, has this like complicated relationship with it where they either get paid to do it or they have to do it through some way or whatever. It's very rarely, this is what my life actually looks like thing.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that's something kind of, going back to the beginning of our conversation when I took a step back, that is something I really struggled with. I mean, we especially with social media, it's all instant gratification, right? We post something, people like it, you're like, yay, people like what I post. To this day, I can go onto my Instagram and post something about running and get immediately like a few hundred likes. I can post that I just had the best adventure race of my life. I won, whatever. And it's like, oh, crickets, because that's it.
Interesting.
Like you said, there is a very specific community that my business
Sure.
caters to, and they don't want to hear about that. So it can be really hard too, when you as a professional in the field, as a coach, when you need to take a step back and make those boundaries so that you don't burn out, it can be really hard to find that balance of like how do I protect myself and do what I need, but still make sure my business is thriving as well. But
Hmm.
like you said, it's similar for me in that I found that sharing like educational things rather than focusing on my running is just much more rewarding. And I hope people get a lot more from that anyway.
Same. Yeah. I mean, nobody needs to see my training. It's not interesting for the most part. It's also not very relevant to theirs. So yeah.
Right, right. But not interesting is probably the best approach. That's the more boring it is, the more it's probably going to work.
Yeah. Absolutely true. Which is, I
Yeah.
mean, I do actually post a lot of my stuff in stories for that reason, right? It's to show that like I do deadlifts every week because they work. they're not they're not whatever kickbacky variation works now. It's like, oh, I pick heavy shit up off the ground and that's why my butt looks the way it does and why it's very
Yeah.
powerful, right? So yeah,
Mhm.
but it's not I don't know, it's not actually that interesting. It's just not good content.
Yeah.
So what do you have like coming up on the are you really running much? Are you very in the
Well,
adventure stuff? Where are we at?
funny you should ask. I just signed up for a 48-hour ultra.
Oh shit, what are you
Yeah,
doing?
and I had to I this is how much of a step back I have taken, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. I had to go onto Facebook, onto the Ladies of Ultra Running or Trail and Ultra Running Ladies group, and say, I don't even know what shoes I need anymore. Like it's been so long, and I've kind of strayed away from Hoka's, and I'm like, what's new on the market? I don't even know. I need to order new shoes. So I ended up with some Topo Mountain Trail. They're right over here. I can't remember what they're called. I don't know. Some new shoes. Yeah, it's time to dive back into some longer distance. We are
Nice.
doing more adventure races next year. We have one called Sea to Sea in February. It's 300-ish miles across the state of Florida. We
What?
start on the
Cool.
West Coast and finish on the East Coast. We did it last year. It was a ton of fun. But yeah, after that, a 48-hour ultra. I don't have any specific goals for that other than I look forward to the process of, training for an ultra again and just kind of being in the community again. I love looped courses. I know a lot of people don't, but I think they're fun. And this one is a 3 mile. It's called the Country Mile. It's a 3 mile loop on a strawberry farm in upstate South Carolina. And we did it in 2021 and 2022, and it's just a ton of fun, so it'll be fun to see a lot of old faces I haven't seen in quite some time. And then after that, I'm not really sure. We're kind of in that phase of, got to pull out the calendar and see what's available and where we can go and when we can get pet sitters.
Yeah, fair. Hey, the pet sitting is tough. I don't know what to do with that half the time. Like he's new, so I just like, still trying to figure that out, very honestly. Yeah. Which what is the draw to loop courses, I guess, is the question I have for you.
So for me, I really don't. I'm going to go ahead and say, again, I'm going to point to my ADHD, which this is going to not make sense to a lot of people because you'll think, well, won't you get bored with that? But what happens is I get bored running in the woods for a long, long time and not seeing people. But when you can do short loops, it's like there's always something going on and there's always people to talk to and there's always like an opportunity to, just change things up if you need to. The atmosphere of them, and I also really like that it gives you opportunity to take a break if you need to, and it just doesn't feel so like final. If you're having a bad day and you say you know maybe I'm out, I don't know, if you're out in the middle of the forest, that's kind of a hard thing to deal with. But if you're on a short looped course, you just go take a seat in your tent for 10 minutes, eat yourself a grilled cheese sandwich, cry a little, and then, you go back out there. But yeah, I don't know. I like to break it up into those tiny little loops. And before I know it, I've done 60, 70, 80 miles. I'm like, oh, that's not so bad. Whereas point to point courses just can feel overwhelming sometimes.
I love that. And this is my favorite thing about the brain. Like I'm also on this some level of neurospicy spectrum, and my brain works very differently. Like I
Yeah.
would just like lose my mind. I do not
Yeah.
want that. So yeah,
A
I
lot
love
of
that.
people.
That's super cool. It's one of my favorite things about this like this sport. It does encompass so much, right? Like to hear people talk about ultras, it's like anywhere from a 50K to 300 miles or whatever. It's very, those are not the same. So yeah,
Mhm.
it has so much for so many people.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the irony, of course, is that in adventure racing, I'm the opposite. Um, in adventure racing, the thing that I really enjoy is the navigation and the like finding those checkpoints. So I cannot stand when there's other people around, when there's other teams around, because I don't like, it's such a game for me to find these checkpoints that I hate when there's large groups of people just kind of all traveling together, because then it takes away that fun.
Right.
You know, I've done a 12-hour race where it felt like it was just a parade. Like all you had to do is follow the people in front of you and get to where you needed to go. So in those races, I prefer if I'm like, I don't want to see anybody till the race is over, just my teammates.
Yeah, it ruins the puzzle. That makes sense.
Yep,
I get that.
exactly.
Cool. Well, thanks, Heather. Is there anything else you want to say on burnout or how to deal with it, or
Yeah.
like
You know,
how to maybe break your year into seasons?
I would say, gosh, two things. One, everybody remember that your body is it's not perfect, or well, I don't want to even say it that way. Remember that you are not an exception to the rule. Your body is going to fail eventually if you don't take care of it. So if nothing else, look at the science and think about your goals and say, like, if this is my goal, what are the things I can do to support that goal in the best possible way? And that is going to include rest, whether it's a rest day, a cutback week, or a whole period of downtime on off season. These things are important. They are well researched. You are not an exception to the rule. Please take some rest. That's my one thing.
Love that.
The other thing is that I just, you know, if you're a person out there, and I know there are people listening who are going to feel this way, if you're a person out there who has struggled in the past with feeling like when you can't run, you feel lost. If you don't run, you feel stressed, you feel anxious, to the point where this bothers you. You know, like if you feel stressed and anxious and you run, you're better and everything's good, then keep on with that. It seems to work for you. But if it bothers you that you're that way, please take a step back and understand why. Whether that's going to be you know, talking to a therapist or talking to a friend, or really just doing some deep diving. Like, I encourage you to really remember that there's more to you as a human. There's so much more to you as a human than running. Running is so cool. And to be a runner and to identify as a runner is awesome. Like, we're such a kick-ass community, especially ultra runners and trail runners, but there is more to you. And there's so much more that people love about you than just the fact that you run. So if you're feeling stressed about that, you know, I highly encourage you to just dive into some other things for a season. It doesn't take away your running card. You know, if you could take a whole year, I don't have an ultra sign up result from this year, I don't think. And I'm still very much an ultra runner. Nobody can take that away from me, and nobody can take that away from you. So try some other things. You know, whether it's another sport or another hobby or just spending time with other people. I think that once you get over that initial shock of being like, oh, I just want to be running, it can be life-changing for you. So that's my mother hen lesson for the day.
I really appreciate that. It's a really good message. And it's one that I've been pushing on the strength training front too. Like, you should lift things because you're more than just a runner, right? Like,
Exactly.
you want to play with your grandkids and stuff as well, right? So like, same idea. Like, you're more than just a runner, and doesn't mean you're not a runner. It just means that it's more to you than that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Heather. I really appreciate you coming on.
Of
It's
course.
been really fun. Where can people find you?
They can find me on the Instagram, Relentless Forward Commotion. I will warn you, there are 50% bicycle and adventure racing posts because, as you mentioned, my midlife crisis is on a bicycle right now. But I do talk about running, and I try to share a lot of like educational posts there. My website is relentlessforwardcommotion.com. Feel free to send me a friend request on Facebook if you want to connect like a little better. I'm not really active on my blog page on Facebook as much as I am on Instagram, but also our coaching is Hart Strength and Endurance Coaching on Instagram, on Facebook, and heartendurancecoaching.com is our website. And that's my coaching business with my husband. And we've got a bunch of other coaches that work with us as well.
Cool. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it for
Thank
coming
you.
on. It's been worthwhile, and it's a conversation that I honestly wish we'd have a lot more of in this space, because it's
Yes. It's
necessary.
important.
Yeah. Thanks so much for hanging out.
Yeah, you're no problem.
Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, Not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it. Or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.